The wardrobe door creaked, and Nita pressed her spine harder against the rough pine boards, holding her breath as the cowboy unbuckled his gun belt not 3 feet away. Through the narrow gap in the wardrobe's door, she watched him peel off his dust-caked shirt, revealing the long scar that ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs. A bullet wound, she guessed. Maybe 2 years old. This was the 4th day she'd watched Reuben Gantry undress in the small room above the Silver Creek trading post, and each day the shame burned hotter in her chest. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. The Texas Rangers had killed her brother at dawn 6 days ago, strung him up on false charges of stealing cavalry horses. They'd come for her next, but she'd slipped into the canyon shadows before their ropes could find her neck. She'd run for 3 days straight, her Apache endurance the only thing keeping her alive, until she'd collapsed behind the trading post. Half dead from thirst and hunger, Reuben shifted his weight, and Nita caught sight of his face in the cracked mirror above the wash basin. He was younger than his weathered hands suggested, maybe 30 years to her 23. His jaw was set in that permanent hard line white men wore when they'd seen too much violence too young, but his eyes were different. Tired. Almost kind. She'd watched him carry water to the old widow Johnson without asking for payment. Watched him break up a fight between 2 drunks without throwing a single punch. Watched him sit alone each night, writing letters by candlelight to someone back east. A sister, maybe, or a sweetheart who'd given up waiting. Damn it all, Reuben muttered, examining a tear in his trouser leg. 3rd pair this month, Nita bit her lip. She'd accidentally caught her foot in those trousers yesterday when he'd tossed them over the chair. The fabric had ripped before she could untangle herself. He stood there in his union suit, running a hand through his dark hair, and Nita saw the moment his shoulders tensed. His head turned slowly toward the wardrobe. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been too careful. She'd barely breathed. She'd memorized his schedule. He left at first light, returned at noon to wash up, headed down to the saloon for supper, came back to sleep around midnight. She'd learned to anticipate every movement, every sound, but something had changed. Reuben walked to the wardrobe, his bare feet silent on the wooden planks. His hand reached for the door handle. Nita's fingers found the knife at her belt. She didn't want to hurt him, but she'd kill him if she had to. Better than hanging from a ranger's rope. The door swung open. Their eyes met, his startled blue against her defiant black. For 3 long seconds, neither moved. Nita saw him register the knife in her hand, saw his gaze travel to the faded bruises on her wrists where the rope had burned her skin during her escape, saw the recognition dawn in his face. "You're that Apache woman they're hunting," he said quietly. "The one they say killed Marshal Pritchard's deputy." "I killed no one," Nita said in careful English. "My brother killed no one, but your Rangers don't care for truth." Reuben's hand hadn't moved toward his gun belt, still hanging on the chair behind him. He just stood there, studying her face like he was reading a book written in a language he'd almost forgotten. "How long you been in there?" he finally asked. 4 days. His eyebrows rose. 4 days? In my wardrobe? Yes, Jesus Christ, he breathed. Then, to her complete shock, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Well, I'll be damned. That explains why my spare boots kept moving." Reuben didn't reach for his gun. He didn't shout for help. He just stood there in his underclothes, one hand still on the wardrobe door, looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "You hungry?" he asked. Nita's grip on the knife didn't waver. "This is a trick." "Ain't no trick. Been 4 days, you said. Can't remember the last time I went 4 days without eating. Figure you must be about ready to gnaw through that pine board you're leaning against." Her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. She saw his expression soften, not with pity, but with something else. Understanding, maybe. "Look," Reuben said, taking a slow step backward with his hands raised. "I'm gonna put on my trousers. If you don't mind, that is, since you've been watching me change for near a week now. Then I'm gonna go downstairs and get us some food. You can stay in that wardrobe if you like, or you can sit in a proper chair like a human being. Your choice. You'll bring the Rangers. I won't. Why should I trust a white man's word?" Reuben was quiet for a moment, pulling on his torn trousers. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, gone rough with old pain. "My mother was Cherokee, only a quarter, but enough that folks in Georgia made sure we knew we weren't quite white enough for their liking. Lost her to cholera when I was 12, but before she died, she told me something I never forgot." He paused, tucking in his shirt. "She said the worst sin a man can commit is standing by while innocent folks get murdered for the color of their skin or the shape of their prayers." Nita watched him strap on his gun belt. her knife still ready, but something in his words had struck a chord deep in her chest. The same chord that had kept her watching him these 4 days, instead of slipping away into the night. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, Reuben said, heading for the door. "You're welcome to stay or go. But if you stay, we need to figure out how to keep you alive." The door clicked shut behind him. Nita remained frozen in the wardrobe for a full minute, her mind racing through possibilities. This could be a trap. He could be downstairs right now whispering to the Rangers. She should run, but her legs wouldn't move. She thought of her brother's face as they'd slipped the noose around his neck, thought of her father, killed in the wars 20 years ago, her mother, dead from white man's disease, her people, scattered and broken across a land that had once been theirs. Running was all she'd ever done. The wardrobe suddenly felt like a coffin. Nita stumbled out, her legs cramping from 4 days of stillness. The room spun and she grabbed the chair to steady herself. Through the window she could see the street below, a handful of people moving about their business, unaware that an Apache woman stood watching them from above. She heard boots on the stairs. Her hand found the knife again, but when the door opened, Reuben was alone. He carried a plate loaded with bread, cheese, and cold beef, plus a tin cup of water. "Figured you wouldn't want me bringing whiskey," he said, setting the plate on the small table. "Keeps the mind clear," my mother used to say. Nita didn't move toward the food, even though every fiber of her being screamed for it. Reuben sighed and cut a piece of the beef, eating it himself. "Not poisoned, see? Now sit down before you fall down. Pride's a fine thing, but it don't fill an empty belly." She sat. The first bite of bread nearly made her weep. She forced herself to eat slowly, maintaining some dignity even as her body begged her to devour everything in sight. Reuben settled into the chair opposite her, watching her eat with that same thoughtful expression. "Got a name?" "Nita." "Nita," he repeated like he was tasting the word. "I'm Reuben, but I reckon you already knew that, seeing as you've been living in my wardrobe." Despite everything, Nita felt her lips twitch. "You talk too much." "Yeah, I've been told that." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "So here's our problem. Rangers are camped just outside town, waiting for you to show yourself. They got a description. Apache woman about 20 years old, 5.5 feet tall, wearing a blue calico dress. That sound about right?" Nita nodded, swallowing a bite of cheese. "Well then," Reuben said, his eyes taking on a calculating gleam. "Reckon we need to make you not look like that anymore." "You want me to wear white woman's clothes," Nita said flatly, setting down the tin cup. "Not just any white woman's clothes." Reuben stood and crossed to a trunk beneath the window. "My sister Prudence left some things here before she went back to Boston. She was about your size." Nita watched him pull out a gray cotton dress with small pearl buttons running up the bodice. It was plain, practical, the kind of dress a shopkeeper's daughter might wear. Nothing like the bright calico that had caught the Rangers' attention when she'd fled through town. "They're looking for an Apache woman," Reuben continued, laying the dress across the bed. "So we make you look like something else. Cut your hair, change your clothes, teach you to walk different. I know how to walk. You walk like someone who grew up in the desert. Long strides, weight on the balls of your feet, always ready to run. White women shuffle around like they're afraid the ground might swallow them up." He demonstrated, mincing across the room with exaggerated steps that made Nita's mouth twitch despite herself. "This is foolishness," she said. "They'll see my face, will they?" Reuben tilted his head, studying her features. "Most white folks can't tell one Apache from another. No offense meant. They see what they expect to see. You wear that dress, pin up your hair under a bonnet, keep your eyes down like a proper modest lady, and I'd bet my best horse they'd walk right past you." Nita wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that hiding in white woman's clothing was a betrayal of everything her people had fought for. But her people were dead or scattered, and pride wouldn't stop a hanging rope. "Why are you helping me?" she asked instead. Reuben was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. 3 years ago, I watched a man get lynched in Tucson. Mexican fellow named Diego Martinez. They said he'd stolen cattle, but I knew Diego. He was honest as Sunday morning. They strung him up anyway because some white rancher wanted his land and it was easier to kill him than buy him out." He looked at Nita, and she saw old guilt etched in the lines around his eyes. "I didn't stop it. I was new to town, didn't want to make trouble. Told myself it wasn't my business. But you've regretted it," Nita said softly. "Every damn day." He pushed away from the trunk. "I ain't gonna stand by again. Not for you, not for anyone. The words hung between them like a promise. I should leave tonight, Nita said, though her voice lacked conviction. Head for the mountains. My mother's sister married into a band near the Mogollon Rim. They'd take me in. That's 3 weeks' travel on foot through country crawling with rangers and bounty hunters. You'd never make it. I've survived worse. Maybe, but you don't have to. Reuben moved to the window, checking the street below. Give it 2 weeks. Let them think you've already fled north. Meanwhile, you stay here, learn to pass as white, and when the time's right, I'll take you to the mountains myself. Got a friend with a freight wagon heading that direction. You could ride hidden in the back. It was a good plan. Too good. Nita's instinct screamed that trusting him was madness. But she was tired. So desperately tired of running. 2 weeks, she said finally. But I keep my knife. Wouldn't ask you to do otherwise. Reuben grinned, and for the first time, Nita saw the younger man beneath the trail-worn exterior. Now about your hair. 20 minutes later, Nita sat rigid in the chair while Reuben stood behind her with a pair of shears. Her long black hair had always been her pride. Her mother used to braid it with strips of red cloth, saying it was beautiful as raven's wings. You sure about this? Reuben asked, the scissors poised above her shoulder. Nita closed her eyes. Cut it. The first snip felt like losing a piece of herself. Long strands fell to the floor, each one a small death. But when Reuben finally stepped back and held up the cracked mirror, Nita barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her hair now hung just past her shoulders in a simple, blunt cut, the kind of practical style white women wore when they couldn't afford fancy arrangements. Combined with the gray dress, she looked almost ordinary. Hell, Reuben breathed. It worked better than I thought. A knock on the door made them both freeze. Reuben? You up there? A man's voice, rough, authoritative. Need a word. That's Deputy Marshal Finch, Reuben whispered urgently. He's one of the rangers hunting you. Get in the wardrobe. No. Nita stood, her heart pounding. If I hide, I'm just a hunted Apache woman in a wardrobe. But if I'm here... She looked down at the gray dress, then back up at Reuben. Who am I? Reuben's eyes widened as he understood. You're my cousin. Arrived yesterday from St. Louis. Name's Catherine. Catherine Porter. Catherine, Nita repeated, testing the strange name on her tongue. Another knock, more insistent. Reuben, coming! He turned to Nita, Catherine, and lowered his voice. Can you do this? She thought of her brother's face. Her mother's teachings. The long line of Apache warriors in her blood. Yes, she said, and opened the door herself. Deputy Marshal Finch stood in the doorway, his hand resting on his gun belt. He was a lean man with a tobacco-stained mustache and eyes like creek ice. Those eyes swept over Nita with the casual dismissal white men reserved for women they considered beneath notice. Didn't know you had company, Reuben, Finch said, his gaze lingering on Nita just long enough to make her skin crawl before sliding back to Reuben. Lady friend? Cousin, Reuben said easily, stepping forward to partially block Nita from view. Catherine Porter, up from St. Louis. Catherine, this is Deputy Marshal Finch. Nita dropped her gaze to the floor and executed an awkward curtsy, the kind she'd seen white women do in town. Sir, she murmured, pitching her voice higher and softer than normal. St. Louis, eh? Finch barely glanced at her again. Long way to travel. Her mother, my aunt, passed last month, Reuben said smoothly. Catherine needed a fresh start. Figured she could help old Mrs. Johnson at the boarding house earn her keep. Finch grunted, already losing interest. Sorry for your loss, miss. He turned his attention fully to Reuben. Look, I need to ask around. We're hunting an Apache squaw, dangerous one. Killed Deputy Pritchard's boy in cold blood up in Prescott, then fled south. Got word she might have passed through Silver Creek about 4 or 5 days ago. Nita kept her eyes down, but she felt the rage building in her chest like a wildfire. Her brother had killed no one. The deputy's boy had been a drunk who'd started a fight and pulled his gun first. But truth didn't matter when rangers needed someone to hang. Haven't seen any Apache women, Reuben said. Course, I've been busy. Catherine here arrived on the Wednesday stage and I've been helping her get settled. Wednesday? Finch's eyes narrowed slightly. That'd be 4 days ago. Nita's heart lurched. She'd collapsed behind the trading post on Wednesday afternoon. If anyone had seen her... That's right, Reuben continued calmly. Had to pick her up from the stage station, get her trunk moved, introduce her around town. Why, something happened Wednesday? Maybe, Finch scratched his jaw. Old Tom the drunk says he saw an Indian woman sneaking around behind the trading post that afternoon. But Tom also says he sees pink elephants when he's been at the whiskey, so he shrugged. Still, we're checking every building, every room. Need to take a look around if you don't mind. Course not, Reuben said. Catherine, maybe step out into the hall while the marshal does his job. Nita moved toward the door, keeping her steps small and shuffling like Reuben had shown her. But as she passed Finch, the marshal's hand shot out and caught her wrist. Wait, he said slowly. Time stopped. Nita felt every eye on her, felt the weight of the knife hidden in the folds of her gray dress. One scream from Finch and she'd have to run again or fight. She could put the knife in his throat before Reuben could stop her, but then what? She'd prove every lie they'd told about her people. What's this? Finch was staring at her wrist, where the rope burns from her escape were still visible, raw and red against her brown skin. Nita's mind raced. The stove. At my mother's house. I burned myself on the stove before she passed. The lie tasted like ash, but Finch seemed to accept it. He released her wrist and stepped back. Clumsy. Yes, sir. Nita fled into the hallway, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She listened to the sounds of Finch searching the room, drawers opening, the trunk lid creaking, boots scuffing across the floor. When he reached the wardrobe, Nita held her breath. Nothing here, Finch announced. Just clothes and a pause. This yours, Reuben? What's that? This Apache bracelet. Beadwork's real pretty. Nita's blood ran cold. She'd dropped her mother's bracelet in the wardrobe 3 days ago when her wrist had cramped. She'd meant to retrieve it but had been too afraid to move when Reuben came back early from the saloon. Oh, that, Reuben said casually. Bought it off a trader last month. Was gonna send it to Prudence back in Boston? She collects that sort of thing. Indian crafts and whatnot. Another long pause. You know it's illegal to trade with hostiles, don't you? The trader was white, Marshal. And last I checked, buying Indian goods at a trading post wasn't illegal. Unless the laws changed? Finch made a non-committal sound. Nita heard him cross to the window, probably checking the street below for any sign of her. This Apache woman we're hunting, Finch said conversationally. She's got family in these parts. Thought maybe she'd try to contact them. Her family's dead, Reuben said quietly. That's what I heard anyway. Most of them, yeah. But there's talk of an aunt married into a band up near Mogollon Rim. We've got men watching the northern trails. Finch's boots moved toward the door. She shows up anywhere within 100 miles, we'll know about it. Nita's escape route had just closed like a trap. Even if she made it out of Silver Creek, she'd never reach her aunt alive. Finch emerged from the room, tipping his hat to Nita. Sorry to disturb you, Miss Porter. Welcome to Silver Creek. Thank you, sir, Nita whispered. She watched him descend the stairs, his spurs jingling with each step. Only when she heard the front door slam did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Reuben appeared in the doorway, his face pale. That was close. Too close. Nita's hands were shaking. He'll be back. He suspects something. Maybe. But he saw what he expected to see. A white woman from St. Louis. We just need to keep up the act. For how long? Nita demanded. You heard him. They're watching the northern trails. I can't reach my aunt. I can't go anywhere. Reuben ran a hand through his hair, thinking. Then we don't go north. We go west. West? There's nothing west but California, Reuben finished. San Francisco, to be exact. My sister Prudence has been after me to visit for 2 years now. Keeps saying I'm wasting my life in this desert hellhole. He met Nita's eyes, and she saw the plan forming in his expression. What if Catherine Porter decided she wanted to see California? And what if her dear cousin Reuben agreed to escort her on the journey? It was insane. It was impossible. It might actually work. For the next week, Nita became Catherine Porter. It was harder than she'd imagined. Every instinct she'd honed over 23 years of life had to be suppressed or reshaped. She learned to keep her eyes downcast when men passed on the street, to fold her hands demurely in her lap, to laugh behind her hand like white women did when something amused them. Reuben was patient, but demanding. He'd grown up watching his mother navigate both Cherokee and white worlds, and he knew every small gesture that marked the difference. Your walk is still wrong, he said on the third day, watching her pace the room. You're leading with your shoulders. White ladies lead with their hips, all those damn corsets force them to. I'm not wearing a corset, Nita said flatly. Didn't say you had to. Just sway a little, like this. He demonstrated, looking ridiculous with his exaggerated hip movements. Despite her frustration, Nita felt laughter bubble up. The first genuine laughter in weeks. You look like a drunk chicken. Well, you look like a scout tracking deer. We've both got work to do, but slowly, painfully, she learned. She learned to sit with her ankles crossed, to use a fork properly, to say pardon me instead of remaining silent. She learned that white women apologized constantly for things that weren't their fault, and that smiling at strangers was expected even when you wanted to spit in their faces. The hardest part was the town itself. Reuben insisted she needed to be seen, to establish Catherine Porter as a real person before they could leave for California. So every afternoon, she accompanied him to the general store or the church social or Mrs. Johnson's boarding house, where she'd supposedly been hired to help with the cooking. "Good afternoon, Miss Porter," old Mrs. Kincaid called out one day, waving from across the street. "Settling in well?" "Yes, ma'am," Nita replied, the English words still feeling foreign on her tongue despite years of speaking the language. "Everyone's been so kind. Well, we're glad to have you. A refined young lady like yourself is just what this rough town needs." Mrs. Kincaid beamed at her, completely oblivious. Nita wanted to laugh, wanted to scream, wanted to tell the old woman that the refined young lady could track a deer for 3 days without water, could skin a rabbit in under a minute, could survive in country that would kill soft white women in hours. Instead, she smiled and said, "You're too kind, Mrs. Kincaid." The performance was exhausting, but gradually, something unexpected happened. As Nita watched the people of Silver Creek going about their lives, she began to see them not as a monolithic enemy, but as individuals. Mrs. Johnson, who'd lost 3 sons in the war, and now poured all her grief into caring for boarders. Young Tommy Fletcher, who stammered when he talked but could fix any broken machine. Even Deputy Marshal Finch had a wife who grew roses and sang in the church choir. They were human, flawed and complex and human. It didn't forgive what they'd done, what their people had done to hers. The genocide, the broken treaties, the casual cruelty, but it made the hate harder to hold on to with both hands. "You're getting good at this," Reuben observed one evening as they sat in his room, eating the supper Mrs. Johnson had sent up. "Catherine Porter's becoming real." "Too real," Nita said quietly. "Sometimes I forget who I am underneath the dress. That's the danger." Reuben set down his fork, his expression serious. "My mother used to say that survival sometimes requires wearing masks, but you can't wear a mask so long that you forget your own face." How did she manage it? Being Cherokee in a white world? "She sang," Reuben said simply. "Old songs her grandmother taught her. She'd sing them when she thought no one was listening, while washing clothes or tending the garden. Said it kept her people's voices alive inside her head." That night, after Reuben had fallen asleep in the chair by the window, Nita stood at the mirror and sang quietly in Apache. The words were a prayer her mother had taught her, a prayer for protection, for strength, for the spirits of the ancestors to guide her path. The sound of her own language was like water in the desert. On the 8th day, Reuben came back from the telegraph office with news. "Got a wire from Prudence. She's delighted we're coming to visit. Says there's a freight wagon leaving for California in 4 days. We can catch it if we head to Tucson." 4 days. Nita felt both relief and strange sadness. She'd be free of Silver Creek, free of the constant fear of discovery, but she'd also be leaving behind something she couldn't quite name. "There's one problem," Reuben continued, his expression troubled. "Finch has been asking questions around town. Nothing specific, but he's got instincts, that one. Keeps saying something doesn't sit right about you showing up the same day the Apache woman disappeared. He suspects. Maybe, or maybe he's just thorough." Reuben paced the room, thinking, "We need to do something to throw him off completely. Make Catherine Porter so real, so ordinary, that he stops looking twice." "Like what?" Reuben stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression almost apologetic. "We need to court." "What?" "Not for real," he said quickly. "Just publicly. Give people a story they can understand. Lonely cowboy falls for his cousin from St. Louis. Folks eat that stuff up. Makes you human to them instead of just a stranger passing through." Nita wanted to refuse, but she could see the logic in it. People trusted stories they recognized, and a romance between cousins was scandalous enough to be interesting without being unbelievable. "How do we do this?" she asked finally. "Tomorrow's Sunday. Church social after services. You come with me, we sit together, maybe I bring you a glass of lemonade. Nothing too forward, but enough that people notice." He met her eyes. And if Finch is watching, he sees a woman courting, not a woman hiding. The next day, Nita wore her best dress, a blue cotton one of Prudence's with small white flowers embroidered on the collar. She let Reuben help her into the wagon, accepting his hand like a proper lady would. The church was small and stifling, packed with bodies and the smell of lye soap. Reverend Thomas droned on about sin and redemption, while Nita sat rigid in the pew, hyper-aware of Reuben's presence beside her. At the social afterward, Reuben brought her lemonade as planned. But when he handed her the glass, their fingers touched, and something electric passed between them. It wasn't part of the performance. Nita looked up and found Reuben staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Well, well," a voice said behind them. "Young love. How touching." They turned to find Deputy Marshal Finch watching them with those cold creek ice eyes, a slight smile on his tobacco-stained lips. "Marshal," Reuben said evenly, not letting go of Nita's hand. "Didn't expect to see you at the church social." "I'm a pillar of the community," Finch replied dryly. "Besides, my wife insists. Says I need more Jesus and less whiskey." His gaze shifted to Nita. "Miss Porter, you're looking well. Silver Creek seems to agree with you." "Thank you, sir," Nita murmured, keeping her eyes appropriately downcast while every nerve in her body screamed danger. "Funny thing," Finch continued, accepting a glass of lemonade from Mrs. Kincaid. "I've been thinking about that Apache woman we're hunting. Been thinking about timing." Reuben's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Nita's. "Marshal, this is a church social. Surely we can talk about something more pleasant?" Course. Just making conversation." Finch took a slow sip of lemonade. "It's just... See, I got to wondering. This Apache woman, she disappeared Wednesday afternoon. And Miss Porter here arrived Wednesday afternoon. Same day, same time, almost to the hour. Coincidence," Reuben said. "The Wednesday stage comes every week. Plenty of people arrive on Wednesdays." True enough. But how many of them have rope burns on their wrists that look fresh? The social chatter around them seemed to fade. Nita could feel eyes turning toward them, curious and hungry for scandal. "Marshal Finch," Nita said quietly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I already explained about the stove burn. If you're suggesting something improper, I'd appreciate you stating it plainly rather than speaking in riddles at a church social." It was bold, maybe too bold for Catherine Porter. But sometimes boldness was the best disguise. Finch's eyebrows rose. "No offense meant, miss. Just doing my job." "Your job is hunting criminals," Reuben said, his voice taking on an edge. "Catherine's not a criminal. She's a grieving woman who came west to start fresh after losing her mother. If you want to interrogate her, do it at the marshal's office with proper cause, not at a church social surrounded by gossips." For a long moment, Finch stared at Reuben, and Nita saw something calculating in his expression. Then he smiled, a cold, thin-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're right, of course. My apologies, Miss Porter. Reuben." He tipped his hat and walked away, but Nita could feel him watching them for the rest of the afternoon. "He knows," she whispered to Reuben as they pretended to admire Mrs. Johnson's prize-winning apple pie. "He suspects. That's different from knowing." But Reuben's jaw was tight with tension. "We need to leave sooner than 4 days. Tomorrow, if possible." "The freight wagon." "Forget the freight wagon. We'll buy horses and supplies tonight, leave at dawn, head for Tucson on our own." It was risky. 2 people traveling alone through Apache country, even a white man and a woman disguised as white, could attract attention. But staying in Silver Creek with Finch circling like a buzzard was riskier. That evening, as Nita helped Mrs. Johnson prepare supper in the boarding house kitchen, the older woman pulled her aside. "Child," Mrs. Johnson said quietly, glancing at the doorway to make sure they were alone. "I've been watching you this past week." Nita's heart sank. "Ma'am, you're in trouble, aren't you?" Not the kind Reuben would cause. He's a good boy for all his rough edges. But trouble nonetheless. There was no point in lying. Mrs. Johnson had kind eyes, but they were sharp too. "Yes, ma'am. Does Reuben know? He's helping me." Mrs. Johnson nodded slowly, her weathered hands continuing to knead bread dough. "My youngest son, Jacob, the one who died in the war, he had a Cherokee sweetheart before he enlisted. Beautiful girl named Mary. When Jacob died, some of the townfolk said it was God's punishment for courting outside his race." Her voice went bitter, as if God cared about skin color more than love. "I'm sorry for your loss," Nita said softly. Mary disappeared a week after Jacob's funeral. Heard later she'd been run out of town by some of the more zealous Christian women, the same ones who now sit in church every Sunday, pretending they never did such a thing. Mrs. Johnson shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. I've always regretted not helping her, not standing up for her. She looked up, meeting Nita's eyes directly. "I don't know what your story is, child, and I'm not asking. But if you need help, you come to me. And if Reuben's taking you somewhere safer, you go with him and don't look back." Tears stung Nita's eyes, the first tears she'd allowed herself since her brother's death. "Thank you. No thanks needed. Just promise me something." Mrs. Johnson's gnarled hand covered Nita's. "Promise me you'll survive. That you'll live a good life, whatever that looks like. People like us, women who've lost too much, we owe it to the ones we love to keep living." "Promise," Nita whispered. That night, Reuben returned to his room with 2 horses, supplies, and grim news. "Finch has men watching the roads," he said, checking his revolver with practiced efficiency. "North, south, and east. He's convinced you're still in town, and he's waiting for you to make a run for it." "What about west?" "That's the interesting part. No one watching west because west leads straight into Apache territory, the real hostile country where the army's still fighting. No white woman in her right mind would head that direction." Nita understood immediately. "So we go west. Through the Superstition Mountains, then south to Tucson. It's rough country, and there's a reason they call those mountains Superstition. Folks disappear in there regular." He looked at her seriously. "But you know that country, don't you? My father hunted there when I was a child, before—" She didn't finish. "Before the wars, before the reservations, before everything had gone to hell. Can you guide us through?" Nita closed her eyes, remembering. The red rock canyons, the hidden springs, the sacred places where her father had taught her to read the land like a book. "Yes, then we leave in 2 hours. Middle of the night when Finch's men are tired and inattentive." Reuben pulled out a leather pouch heavy with coins. "This is everything I've saved over 5 years. Should be enough to get us to California and set up somewhere new." "You're giving up your whole life for me," Nita said, the weight of it suddenly crushing. "Your job, your home, your—" "My life here was just killing time," Reuben interrupted, waiting for something to matter. "This matters." He met her eyes, and in the candlelight, his expression was unbearably earnest. "You matter." The words hung between them like a confession. Nita thought about the past 8 days, about watching this man from the wardrobe, learning his routines, his kindnesses, his quiet loneliness, about how he'd risked everything to help her without asking for anything in return, about how her heart had started beating differently when he was near. "Reuben," she began, but he shook his head. Don't say anything now. We've got a long road ahead, plenty of time for words then." He turned away, busying himself with packing supplies. "Get some rest. We ride at midnight," but Nita couldn't rest. She stood at the window, watching Silver Creek settle into sleep, and thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. From her brother's execution, to a wardrobe, to a false name, to this moment, poised between 2 worlds. At midnight, they slipped out the back stairs of the boarding house. The horses waited in the alley, already saddled and loaded. Reuben had chosen well, sturdy mounts that wouldn't spook easy. "Ready?" he whispered. Nita swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, her body remembering skills Catherine Porter would never have. "Ready." They rode west through the sleeping town, their horses' hooves muffled by the dust. Past the darkened trading post, past the church with its white steeple gleaming in the moonlight, past the saloon where a few die-hard drunks still gambled by lantern light. At the edge of town, a figure stepped from the shadows. Nita's hand went to her knife, but Reuben raised a calming hand. It was Mrs. Johnson, wrapped in a shawl against the desert night chill. "Thought I might catch you," the old woman said quietly. She pressed a wrapped bundle into Nita's hands. Food for the journey. And this. She pulled out a small leather-bound book. My Jacob's diary. He wrote about Mary in it, about how much he loved her, how he didn't care what anyone thought. Thought you might like to know someone else walked this path before you. Mrs. Johnson. Nita's voice broke. Hush now. You ride hard and don't look back. And when you get to California, you write me a letter. Don't need to say where you are, just let an old woman know you made it. We will, Reuben promised. Mrs. Johnson looked up at them both, her eyes shining with tears in the moonlight. Take care of each other. That's all that matters in this hard world, taking care of each other. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the shadows like a ghost. They rode west into Apache country, into the wild mountains where white men feared to go. Behind them, Silver Creek faded into darkness. Ahead, the superstitions rose like ancient sentinels against the star-scattered sky. And for the first time since her brother's death, Nita felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The Superstition Mountains looked different in moonlight, older somehow, more dangerous. Nita led them along paths she'd traveled as a child, her body remembering what her mind had half forgotten. Here was the canyon where her father had killed his first deer. There, the spring where her mother had gathered healing herbs. Every rock and shadow held memories of a life that no longer existed. How far until we're clear of Finch's Reach? Reuben asked, his voice low in the darkness. 3 days through the mountains, maybe 4. Then 2 more to Tucson. Nita guided her horse around a cluster of barrel cactus. But the real danger isn't Finch anymore. Apache war parties? Some, but mostly the land itself. Water's scarce this time of year. One wrong turn and we could die of thirst before we find the next spring. They rode in silence for another hour before Nita called a halt near an outcropping of red rock. We rest here until dawn. The horses need water, and there's a spring just beyond those rocks. The spring was little more than a seep, but the water was cold and clear. While the horses drank, Reuben unpacked Mrs. Johnson's bundle, dried beef, hardtack, and a jar of preserved peaches that must have cost the old woman dearly. She didn't have to do that, Nita said softly. People surprise you sometimes. Reuben opened the jar and offered it to her. My mother used to say the world's full of unexpected kindness if you know where to look. They ate in comfortable silence, sharing the peaches between them. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and Nita found herself naming them in Apache, teaching Reuben the stories her father had taught her. That cluster there, you call it the Pleiades. We call it the seed stars, because they appear when it's time to plant. She traced the pattern with her finger, and that bright one is not a star at all but a warrior's spirit, still watching over his people. Do you believe that? Reuben asked. The spirit's watching over us? I don't know anymore. If they're watching, they haven't intervened much lately. Bitterness crept into her voice. Where were they when the Rangers hanged my brother? When they scattered my people like dust? Reuben was quiet for a moment. My mother used to say the spirits don't stop bad things from happening. They just give us strength to survive them. To keep going when everything says we should lay down and die. Is that what we're doing? Surviving? Yes, and more than that, we're living. There's a difference. Nita looked at him across the small fire they'd built, careful to keep it low and smokeless. His face was shadowed, but his eyes caught the firelight and held it. In that moment, she saw him clearly, not as the white cowboy who'd found her in his wardrobe, but as something else. Someone else, a man who'd chosen her over his own safety, who'd given up everything without hesitation. Why did you really help me? She asked. The truth this time. Reuben poked at the fire with a stick, considering his words. You remember I told you about Diego Martinez? The man they lynched in Tucson? Yes. What I didn't tell you was that I was in love with his daughter, Rosa. She was... He smiled sadly. She was like sunrise after a long night. Made me believe the world could be better than it was. Nita's chest tightened. What happened to her? After they killed her father, she looked at me, looked right through me and asked if I'd helped. When I said no, she asked if I'd tried to stop it. When I said no again, he shook his head. She said my silence was the same as pulling the rope. Then she left town and I never saw her again. She was wrong, Nita said fiercely. You were one man against a mob. Maybe. But she wasn't wrong about the silence. Reuben looked up, meeting Nita's eyes. I've been silent my whole life. Kept my head down. Didn't make trouble. Tried to pass as white enough that people wouldn't look too close at my Cherokee blood. And what did it get me? A lonely room above a trading post and a soul full of regrets. He reached out and took her hand, not as part of the Catherine Porter performance, but as himself to herself. When I found you in that wardrobe, he continued, I saw a chance to finally do the right thing. To be the man my mother raised me to be instead of the coward I'd become. His thumb traced small circles on her palm. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about redemption and started being about you. Nita's heart hammered in her chest. Reuben, A sound cut through the night, the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. They both froze. Well, ain't this touching? A voice drawled from the darkness beyond the firelight. Young love in the wilderness. Deputy Marshal Finch stepped into view, his rifle trained on Reuben's chest. Behind him, 2 other men emerged, both wearing ranger badges and carrying enough weaponry to start a small war. How? Reuben started. Followed you from town, Finch said pleasantly. Hung back far enough that you wouldn't notice, close enough that I wouldn't lose you. Been tracking folk through this desert for 20 years, son. You think I don't know every trick in the book? Nita's hand moved slowly toward her knife, but Finch shook his head. Wouldn't do that, miss. Porter, is it? Or should I say Nita? The sound of her real name on his lips sent ice through her veins. Oh yes, I figured it out, Finch continued. Took me a while, I'll admit. The hair, the dress, the accent, you're good, real good. But you made one mistake. He gestured with his rifle. The bracelet in Reuben's wardrobe. I had a friend look at it, friend who knows Apache beadwork. Said it was made by the Chiricahua band, personal style unique to one family. Your family, as it turns out. Reuben moved slowly to his feet, hands raised. Marshal, listen to me. Nita didn't kill anyone. Her brother didn't kill anyone. It was self-defense, and you know it. What I know is there's a bounty on her head and a hanging rope waiting in Prescott, Finch said. Now you can come quiet-like, or my boys can hog-tie you both. Your choice. Nita stood as well, her mind racing through options. They were outgunned and outnumbered. Running would get them shot in the back. Fighting would get Reuben killed. There was only one choice. I'll come quietly, she said. But you let Reuben go. He was just trying to help. He didn't know who I was. That's a damn lie, Reuben started, but Nita cut him off. He thought I was his cousin. I deceived him. It's not his fault. Finch smiled that cold smile. Noble of you. But I'm not stupid. Reuben here aided and abetted a fugitive. That's a hanging offense too. Like hell? Reuben lunged forward, but one of the rangers clubbed him with a rifle butt. He went down hard, blood streaming from his temple. Reuben. Nita tried to rush to him, but Finch grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. Easy now. He'll live. Got a hard head, that one. Now let's get you both trussed up and ready for the journey back. Marshal Pritchard's gonna be real pleased when I deliver you both. As the rangers bound her wrists with rough rope, Nita met Reuben's dazed eyes across the fire. She saw fury there and fear and something else, determination. He wasn't giving up. Neither was she. This wasn't over. They rode for 2 days like that. Hands bound, ropes connecting them to the rangers' saddles like pack animals. Finch kept them separated, Nita in front where he could watch her, Reuben behind with the other 2 rangers. They weren't allowed to speak to each other. But on the morning of the 3rd day, everything changed. The Apache warriors appeared like ghosts from the Red Rock Canyons, 15 of them, painted for war, rifles and bows at the ready. They surrounded Finch's party before the rangers could even draw their weapons. Don't move, Finch hissed to his men. We're outnumbered 5-1. The leader of the warriors rode forward, an older man with gray streaking his long black hair and eyes like chips of obsidian. Nita recognized him immediately. Uncle, she said in Apache. I thought you were dead. Your father's brother lives, he replied in the same language, though many others do not. His gaze swept over her bound wrists, the ranger horses, the white men holding rifles with shaking hands. These men take you to hang? Yes, for what crime? For my brother's death. They say I killed a white lawman. Her uncle's expression darkened. Your brother was murdered by rangers. This we know. We were tracking them for vengeance when we found your trail. He looked at Finch. This one leads them? Yes. The uncle spoke in English now, addressing Finch directly. You release the woman and her companion. You leave this territory. You do not return. Finch's rifle was still holstered, but his hand hovered near it. Can't do that. She's wanted for murder. I've got a duty. Your duty, the uncle interrupted, is to leave this place alive. That is the only choice I offer. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nita could see the calculation in Finch's eyes, weighing duty against survival, pride against pragmatism. If I let her go, she'll just keep running, Finch said finally. She'll never be safe. Neither will Reuben. There'll always be more rangers, more bounty hunters. Then we kill all who come, the uncle said simply. You can't kill everyone. Eventually the army will come in force. Your people will suffer for this. My people suffer already. The uncle's voice was bitter. What is one more war? But perhaps, he paused, considering. Perhaps there is another way. He turned to Nita, switching back to Apache. The white laws do not reach beyond these mountains. If you and your man stay with us, live as we live, you will be safe. No ranger dares enter our stronghold. Nita translated for Reuben, whose eyes widened. He's offering us sanctuary, Reuben said. With his band? Yes, but it would mean... Nita swallowed hard. It would mean living as Apache. No more towns, no more white society. Just the mountains and the old ways. She saw Reuben process this, saw him look around at the warriors surrounding them, at the harsh desert landscape, at the life he'd be choosing. It was a far cry from California and San Francisco and his sister Prudence's comfortable home. What do you want? He asked her. The question caught Nita off guard. What I want doesn't matter. This is your life too. The hell it doesn't matter. You think I came this far to make decisions for you? Reuben's voice was fierce despite the blood still crusted on his temple. So I'm asking, what do you want? Nita looked at her uncle, at the warriors, at the mountains rising around them. She thought about her father's stories, her mother's songs, the language that felt like home in her mouth. She thought about never having to pretend to be Catherine Porter again, never having to shuffle her steps or lower her eyes or bite her tongue. But she also thought about Mrs. Johnson's kindness, about the possibility of a life beyond constant warfare, about building something new instead of just surviving. I don't know, she admitted. I've been running so long I'm not sure I know how to stop, but... She met Reuben's eyes. I know I don't want to lose you. Whatever we choose together. Then let's choose something different, Reuben said. Not running, not hiding, something new. He turned to Finch, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority Nita had never heard from him before. Marshal, you're a practical man. You know this situation can only end two ways, bloodshed or compromise. So here's what I propose. I'm listening, Finch said warily. You let us go. Tell your superiors we died out here. Apache attack, whatever story makes sense. In exchange, Reuben paused. In exchange, Nita gives you information about the deputy's death. The real story, with details only someone who was there would know. You can't use it to arrest her, but you can use it to close the case as self-defense. Clear your conscience and do the right thing for once in your miserable career. Finch's jaw tightened. And what's to stop these Apache from killing us the moment I release you? My word, the uncle said. I am called Nantan by my people. My word is iron. If you accept this bargain and leave in peace, you will not be harmed. The tension stretched like a rope about to snap. Finally, Finch let out a long breath and lowered his rifle. God damn it all, he muttered. He looked at Nita. Tell me what happened. The truth, so Nita told him. About how Deputy Marshal Pritchard's son had come to the Apache camp, drunk and belligerent. How he'd accused her brother of stealing his horse. A horse that had never been stolen, that was later found wandering near the saloon. How he'd drawn his gun first, fired first, missed. How her brother had returned fire in self-defense and fled when he realized a white man lay dead, and no jury would believe an Apache's word against a marshal's son. We ran, Nita said, her voice hollow with old grief. But the rangers caught us at dawn. They didn't want a trial, just a rope and a convenient scapegoat. Finch was quiet for a long time. Then, I knew Pritchard's boy. He was a drunk and a fool, always looking for a fight. He looked at Nita with something that might have been regret. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Finch cut their bonds himself. You two are dead, understand? Killed by Apache and the superstitions. I'll make it official, file the reports. But if I ever see either of you again, in any town, under any name, the deal's off. You won't, Reuben promised. The rangers left at a gallop, heading east toward the settlements. Nita watched them go, rubbing her chafed wrists, hardly believing it was real. Come, Nantan said in Apache. We have much to discuss, niece. And your man, he will need training if he is to survive our life. We're not staying with you, uncle, Nita said gently. Though I thank you for the offer, Nantan raised an eyebrow. Then what will you do? Where will you go? Nita looked at Reuben and she saw the answer in his eyes, the same answer she felt in her own heart. Somewhere new, she said. Somewhere we can be ourselves, both of us together. I don't know where yet, but she took Reuben's hand. We'll figure it out. Nantan studied them both for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Your father was the same way, always choosing his own path, even when the clan disapproved. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. Take this. Gold from a Spanish cache we found in the mountains. It will help you start fresh. Uncle, you can and you will. Consider it a wedding gift. His smile widened at Nita's shocked expression. You think I don't recognize the look between you? I was young once too, niece. They found the valley 3 weeks later, tucked between red cliffs in the high desert of New Mexico territory, far from Silver Creek, far from the rangers, far from anyone who'd known them before. The valley held a spring-fed creek, enough grass for horses and a small garden, and a grove of cottonwood trees that whispered in the wind like voices from another time. An old adobe structure stood near the creek, abandoned decades ago, half collapsed but salvageable. Could be something, Reuben said, surveying the ruins with a builder's eye. Good bones. Strong walls where they're still standing. Nita walked through the doorway, imagining. A home. An actual home, not a wardrobe or a rented room or a temporary shelter. A place to stay. Could be something, she agreed. They worked through the summer, rebuilding the adobe house wall by wall. Reuben taught Nita carpentry tricks his father had taught him. Nita showed Reuben how to find water in dry country, how to read weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the desert without disturbing the life that lived there. Some days they spoke in English, some days in Apache, sometimes in a mixture of both languages that became uniquely theirs. Nita braided her growing hair with strips of red cloth like her mother used to do. Reuben learned Apache songs and sang them while working, his voice rough but earnest. They never formally married. No church, no government license, no white man ceremony. But on a cool evening in September, with the sunset painting the cliffs gold and crimson, Nita wove a bracelet for Reuben using techniques her grandmother had taught her, and Reuben carved a wooden comb for Nita, inlaying it with turquoise he'd bought from a traveling trader. They exchanged these gifts beneath the cottonwood trees, and Nantan, who'd ridden 3 days to be there, spoke the old words of binding in Apache while Reuben translated them haltingly into English. Two souls, walking the same path. Two hearts beating as one. Two lives woven together like sweetgrass, stronger together than apart. It was enough, more than enough. The first year was hard. They learned to farm in desert soil, to trap enough game to survive winter, to defend their small homestead from both human and animal predators. Reuben proved handy with tools and weapons both. Nita's knowledge of desert survival kept them fed when the garden failed. They argued sometimes, about money, about whether to trade with the nearest settlement 20 miles east, about how much contact to maintain with Nantan's band. But they also laughed. God, how they laughed. Reuben taught Nita card games, and she taught him Apache gambling games with stones and sticks. They raced horses across the valley floor. They read aloud from books Reuben had brought from Silver Creek, he stumbling through English, she correcting his pronunciation with gentle teasing, and on cold winter nights, they lay together in their rebuilt adobe house and told each other stories. Nita shared Apache legends, stories of coyote and eagle, of child of water and white-painted woman. Reuben told her about growing up half Cherokee in Georgia, about his mother's quiet strength, about his sister Prudence who wrote letters asking why he'd disappeared. Should you write her back? Nita asked one night, tracing the scar on his ribs with her finger. Maybe someday, when enough time has passed that Finch's story has become truth. When Reuben Gantry is truly dead and buried, he caught her hand, kissed her fingertips. For now I like being nobody. Just a man in a valley with the woman he loves. It was the first time either of them had said the word love aloud, though they'd shown it 1,000 ways over the past months. I love you too, Nita whispered. Even though you snore and can't cook worth a damn. Reuben laughed, the deep full belly laugh she'd learned to cherish. And I love you, even though you're better with a rifle than me and refuse to admit it. That's because I am better with a rifle. I know. That's why I specified it. They built a life in that valley, small and quiet and theirs. Some years later, a child came, a daughter with Nita's black hair and Reuben's blue eyes, who grew up speaking 2 languages and learning 2 cultures' ways. Then a son, then another daughter. Nantan visited every spring, bringing news of the outside world, of Apache wars winding down, of reservations being established. of the old ways dying slowly but stubbornly, refusing to vanish completely. He watched Nita and Reuben's children with pride, saying they were proof that new ways could honor old roots. "You've done what I could not," he told Nita on his final visit, when age had bent his back and silvered all his hair. "You've survived not by fighting or hiding, but by choosing, by making a life instead of just avoiding death." After he died, peacefully, in his sleep beneath the cottonwoods, Nita wept for 3 days, but then she dried her tears and taught her children the stories he'd taught her, the songs, the old Apache words for things that had no English equivalent. Years passed. Their children grew, married, brought grandchildren. The valley filled with life and laughter. Occasionally travelers passed through, traders, prospectors, sometimes Apache people looking for work or shelter. Nita and Reuben welcomed them all, asking no questions, offering what help they could. They never returned to Silver Creek, never saw Deputy Marshal Finch again, never learned what story he'd told or whether anyone had believed it. They became ghosts, legends, a story whispered around campfires, the Apache woman and the cowboy who disappeared into the superstitions and were never seen again. But they weren't ghosts. They were flesh and blood and love and choice. They were mornings waking up together and evenings watching the sunset paint their valley gold. They were arguments and reconciliations, triumphs and failures, laughter and tears and the steady accumulation of a life well lived. On their 30th year in the valley, Nita and Reuben sat together on the porch they'd built, their hands still finding each other automatically after all these years. Their hair had gone gray, their bodies had slowed, but their eyes still held that same spark that had ignited in a small room above a trading post so long ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Nita asked. "Giving up everything for me?" Reuben looked at the valley, at the house they'd built, the children and grandchildren playing by the creek, the life they'd carved from nothing. He looked at Nita, his impossible Apache woman who'd hidden in his wardrobe and stolen his heart. "Not for one damn second," he said, and he meant it, every word. They'd started as hunter and hunted, as fugitives running from injustice. They'd survived through cleverness and courage and the unexpected kindness of strangers. But they'd become something more, partners, lovers, builders of a new world where two people from different worlds could forge one life together. It wasn't the ending either of them had imagined when they'd fled Silver Creek all those years ago. It was better, because it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning that just kept beginning, year after year, day after day. Moment by precious moment, the sun set over their valley, painting the cliffs the same golden crimson it had painted them 30 years before. And Nita and Reuben sat together in the gathering dusk, hands intertwined, hearts beating as one, two souls still walking the same path they'd chosen together. Still choosing each other, still choosing love, always.